You look at the number of metros in cities from 5 to 20, airports doubled from 74 to 150. You look at the railway electrification, 21,000 kilometers to 65,000 kilometers. You look at the highways made. We've made half the length of highways in the last 10 years that we'd made 60 years previous to the last 10 years, so on and so forth. But more importantly, if you look at in the last 1 year, what India has achieved. So not just last 11 years of Modi, last 1 year of Modi. Our GST collection has been the highest ever since records began, $270 billion. Our vehicle sales have been the highest ever, 25 million. Our exports have been the highest ever, 820 billion. Our PMI manufacturing has been the highest ever, 59.2. Number of jobs created last year have been the highest ever, 47 million. Our Gini coefficient has been the lowest ever, 0.28. That is a measure of inequality. Our Sensex has been at the highest ever, 85,000. Our Forex reserves have been at the highest ever, $705 billion. So why is it that your dear friend Rahul Gandhi says we are a dead economy?
First of all, Professor, let me say that the honor and the pleasure are both mine. And so that there's no ambiguity about this, I've traveled all the way from Delhi to have this 45-minute or 1-hour conversation with you, and I'm flying right back. So I take this seriously. One of my laments, and I think my friend Meenakshi ji sitting here will agree with me, that whilst there is no ambiguity, no doubt about the progress in sheer numbers that has been registered between 2014, since the Prime Minister assumed responsibility, and today, I don't think there's anything. What there has been, I think, is a notable shortcoming in terms of our less than effective narrative setting. And I think your introductory statement to this session, before you come to a very important question on why a particular youth leader chooses to describe the state of the economy as he did, I'll come to that. I think we've been found wanting on the narrative setting. It's not my view. I think many of us believe कि काम बहुत अच्छा करते हैं पर अपनी बात को आगे रख नहीं सकते, या रखते हैं तो हमारे जो political colleagues हैं, associates हैं, वो घुमा फिरा के उसको, they get you tied down with something or the other. And I'll come to some of those issues. Let me tell you that I agree with all the statistics that you gave, except one, that the number of people that we lifted out of multidimensional poverty, I believe that's the correct term there now, is not 250 million, it's 270 million. It's like 272 million people out of abject poverty have been lifted during these 10 years. The other thing, Professor, is that I've been a civil servant most of my life. I was 39 years in the Foreign Service. And I can share with you that when I was posted to New York as India's permanent representative, and that was the year 2009, that was the time that the Millennium Development Goals were nearing completion, and we were beginning work on the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was very well acknowledged then that the MDGs, in spite of their conceptual flaw in design, you see, the MDGs were conceptualized by the think tank of the West called the OECD, which meant that Professor Pal sitting there, you have to do this by this year, you have to do this by this year. There were prescriptions passed on to us. But having said that, the MDGs succeeded because China succeeded. Because China succeeded in lifting hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty. When it came to the design of the SDGs, I was part of that process. I played a small part. I was India's permanent representative. Work had already started. We said that unless you change the basic format, you will have problems. And therefore, let it be a bottoms up, from the grassroots level up, recommendations on what the design of the SDGs should be. And then you reached a number of goals, etc., etc. But very soon, just even before the SDGs commenced, people turned around and said, well, MDGs succeeded because of China, SDGs will succeed because of India. And if India succeeds, SDGs will succeed. And that is what has happened. That is where your 272 million people being lifted out of abject poverty is now what is the driving force of the success. I'll come to other areas. You know, the fact of the matter is that before that statement was made, or around that time, the rate of quarterly growth was made known. And this was the last quarter, which is the first quarter of the current fiscal year, and the rate of growth was 7.8%. And the previous quarter was 7.4%, which is the last quarter of the last fiscal year. Also around that time, S&P had lifted our rating after 18 years. After that, others came in. Now you tell me an economy which is growing at 7.8% in one quarter, 7.4% the other quarter, an economy who, in your words, whose GDP has tripled from, has doubled from $2 trillion in 2014 to $4.3 trillion now, where the per capita has come, you decide to call that a dead economy? Now, I've been around for a long time, so I know a lot of very bright people, some well-meaning, some not many. They don't use their brains very often, so they may come up with a long statement. That's entirely possible. I don't know. But this one is a little more concerning. I think this is not a case of somebody not using the brain often enough. It's more a case of the brain being in the wrong part of the anatomy.
इसको काट दो भाई, ये क्या कहती है?
No, I'm seriously. Here you see, I mean, you talked about, Anand, if I may call you, you're a friend. Anand, anybody who goes around India, I do a lot of traveling. I go to tier 2, 3 cities, tier 3 cities. I was in Numaligarh the other day with the Honorable Prime Minister, where India's first bioethanol plant making biofuels from bamboo was done. You see what is happening in the country. Number of airports you mentioned have gone up from 74 to 168 or something like that. Your trains, your airport capacity. Delhi, those of us who live in Delhi, there's another airport coming up, Jewar, which is going to be ready in October. The combined capacity of Delhi and Jewar together will be more than London, Heathrow, Gatwick, Stansted pulled together, which is 140 million. When I joined the Foreign Service and went on my first posting, Delhi airport used to be called Palam Airport. It had not been called Indira Gandhi International Airport. And that airport used to carry 3 million. Now it's going up to 140 million. But look at the fundamental transformation in the economy. Today you're firing on all 6 cylinders. Now, why somebody chooses to, I don't want to, I didn't take any names, but you mentioned somebody, I had several things. This is not the correct appreciation. But what are, I was a civil servant for 39 years. I was doing international think tanking for 4 years. I've been in the Council of Ministers for 8 years, my 9th year. I always tell myself, when you look at, when I think of you, what do I think of? Somebody who educates us every evening in prime time. Okay, that's what you're associated with. When I talk about a politician, I'm reminded of what a German philosopher says. He said, genius lies in identifying yourself with a principle. Sure enough, he identified himself with somebody, and that was nationalism. But today, what is it that some of my friends in the opposition bloc of politics are identifying themselves with? I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. They said this SIR, हमने कहा हम करवा रहे हैं. उन्होंने कहा हाँ, ultimately this is their line. करवाइए पर देश भर में कराइए. I said thank you very much. This is exactly what we've been saying. अब दिल्ली में करवाने वाले आ जाओ, दिल्ली में करवा लेते हैं. कास्ट सेंसस हमने कब मना किया? भाई हमने कहा हम आपके ये सब कास्ट जो भी हम कास्ट सेंसस जब करवाएंगे उसमें ये होगा, हम करवा रहे हैं. अरे भाई, every issue that you take out, I can understand any political formation wanting to couch their program in language which serves their short-term and medium-term agenda. But some of the issues these guys are raising don't even serve their interest. So I think some of them need new advisors. One of the advisors lives outside, and he went recently to one of our Western neighbors, and there he said, I feel very comfortable here. Now, I don't know how you define comfort. If you spend an evening in some bazaar or something, you feel comfortable. But what is this? I mean, look at the tangible progress. Do say, I don't like you. But then look at the welfareism. 80 crore people are being fed 3 meals of dry ration in a day. You're giving a gas cylinder for 6 cents to the Ujjwala beneficiaries. Then you say the economy is dead. My God.
So, which brings us to the next question, which is equally important, I would say, Hardeepji, that I am all for India being a welfare state. If India wasn't a welfare state, we would wipe out tens, perhaps hundreds of millions of Indians. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants an island of prosperity in an ocean of despair, or a gated community having a GDP per capita of $50,000 while the rest of India, wallows in $2,500 to $3,000 per capita. No one wants that. And we've seen spectacular progress as far as welfareism is concerned. No other government on record has delivered as much welfareism as Modi Sarkar has, and the proof is in the pudding. But go beyond the numbers. For example, people talk about 120 million toilets that have been made. Of course, they've given dignity to the people who are using that toilet. But just a layer beyond that, you realize that every new toilet built is saving that household upwards of 50,000 rupees in health costs. When you give 100 million Ujjwala gas connections, go beyond the cylinder, and you realize that the infant mortality is being slashed to the extent that 150,000 lives are being directly saved by Ujjwala. Even I didn't know this, that the biggest cause of infant mortality in India is not some disease. It's actually household pollution. You go a little beyond, for example, Ayushman health cards, 370 million health cards, and you realize that out-of-pocket expenditure, that was the fastest descent of an Indian into poverty, has been slashed by 28%. So many other data, 120 million tap water connections, diarrheal deaths under 5 have been reduced by half. 1 billion Indians vaccinated twice over within a. So welfare is important. What I want to ask, and everyone is for welfare, what I want to ask you is that, is the government also concerned about this line that must be demarcated between welfareism and freebism? How are we going to continue to be a welfare state if we are right now in debt of 260 lakh crores? Is the government thinking about this?
Well, first of all, let me say that you've taken this interactive session into one of the most important areas which needs focus and some understanding. First and foremost, I think from my point of view, I want to clarify a few things. Welfareism by itself is a much used, often misunderstood, and quite often maligned term. In the Indian context, you should look at welfareism in the context of the development challenges that we are facing. And those development challenges are that your GDP, as per a Cambridge historian, Angus Maddison, in the year 1700, well documented, means India's GDP, our GDP and China's together was about 50% of global GDP as a contribution percentage. You move from 1700 to 1750. Why am I using 1750? Because Battle of Plassey, 1757, our 190 years relationship with our colonial masters dates from there till 1947. Your GDP goes from, at the best, 27% to 23% of global. It comes down to 3% or 2%. And after that, it remains like that for a period of time. For a variety of reasons. You can say that that is the colonial hangover. Those are the development challenges you face.
So-called Hindu rate of growth.
Well, possibly. That's one term Hindu we don't use. That's more associated with the guys who were in power from 1947 almost uninterrupted. But Anand, my concern is that when somebody talks about what you call freebieism, there has to be a much deeper understanding of what is welfareism and what is the kind. I'll give you a small example. If you decide, as one political formation did, and I'm not going to name them, but it's going to be pretty clear, हम हर एक परिवार को 300 यूनिट बिजली मुफ्त देंगे. That is a position which was practiced in place A and place B. I'm not getting into it. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't like to sit in judgment either about the clothes you wear, about the food you eat. I'm made that way. But can I come up with something better? And I think we did come up with something better, which is come and take a little loan from us. We can call it a subsidy also, a part of it. Set up a rooftop solar panel, produce 300 units of bijli, which you would have got free from the previous dispensation. Utilize that for your personal consumption. If you have more than that available, set up an electric vehicle charging station under your house. Charge your vehicles. You want to commercially charge other people's vehicles, do that. If you still have electricity available, put it into the grid and we'll compensate you. Now you tell me which model is better. The pure freebie model or a nuanced, repackaged model which makes it productive and which makes it economic growth generating. Now I'll come to one or two other examples also. You mentioned, Anand, the number of toilets built. You know, I start a little earlier. I'm one of the earlier he for she's. I'm married to a feminist. You start with the dignity of the girl child. That's what the toilet building scheme did. I was Housing and Urban Affairs Minister for 7 years. I know how many community and what's it called? Community toilets and public toilets. CTs and PTs were built. The figure you gave is actually higher. I mean, if you say 12 crore and 11 crores and higher. But you also built a lot of individual household toilets. I mean, the figure is something like 65 lakhs or something. So now I'm coming to a different point. Today, you've changed your entire attitude. And I totally agree with you. It's not, I would just add, dignity of the girl child. It frees people up. If the lady of the house gets clean cooking gas, and we, by the way, supply it for 6 cents a cylinder, one cylinder for a family of 4, if there are 33 crore connections, you have a 1.4 billion population, you saturated the population. And then you got piped natural gas. You know, I was astounded when I went even to Brazil. It's a country I greatly admire. I used to be ambassador there. Even they don't have clean cooking gas in their rural areas. 35% of their population is still served with charcoal, firewood. So this is amazing. So the WHO statistics on how much you save are totally correct. Do we need to do a bit of freebieism? I'm going to say something which in an educated audience might say, yes, you'll have to do a little bit of it. Till you reach a level of development where, and I can share with you, my boss, the Honorable Prime Minister, he's very clear. He says that you have to give assistance when somebody is in a vulnerable, economically vulnerable state. India is one of the countries where there is an earthquake in Turkey or there is a tsunami in the Indian Ocean somewhere. We are sending relief. You talked about vaccines. You know, the previous government had disbanded the vaccine manufacturing program in the private sector between 2010 and 14. When the pandemic hit us, it was not like Ebola and swine flu, which I dealt with when I was ambassador to the UN in Geneva. This was like the Spanish flu, millions got. Well, you recreated that facility in the private sector, 220, 240 crore doses of vaccines produced, almost distributed free, not only within India, but outside. Yes, that is the kind of welfareism I like. That's the kind of freebieism I like. What I am a little doubtful about whether you can make freebieism a platform for political.
And-
That's where I draw the distinction.
Right. And that is where I was coming to because, I think at the end, you kind of blurred that line when you talked about vaccine and said that's the kind of welfareism / freebieism I like. And I think this is the crux going forward. It's not just your government's criticism. It is the society's criticism and the courts as well. No one's willing to draw that line. And unless we draw that line,
I agree.
it's a very difficult, demarcation to make. I'll give you a couple of examples. And I think the worrying trend, Hardeep Ji, is that moving forward, every party is in the same pool. For example, when Rahul Gandhi said, and I can name him, here, your very dear friend, he said that MSP should be guaranteed on every agricultural product. And the BJP government rightly mocked and criticized him, said, are you mad? You're going to shell out 16 to 20 lakh crores every year from the budget that Mrs. Sitaraman dishes out, 45 lakh crores, we'll go bankrupt. But then came Haryana election. And the BJP promised exactly that to every Haryana farmer. And BJP won. Now, BJP rightly mocked Rahul Gandhi's Khatakat scheme, Khatakat, 1 lakh rupees to every woman. BJP rightly mocked it. Then came Maharashtra election. BJP not just promised, it implemented giving 1,500 rupees per month to every eligible Maharashtrian woman 21 to 60 and BJP won. As a result, Maharashtra's debt is now 8 lakh crores. I mean, as I said, the cumulative debt of states is reaching or probably surpassed 1 lakh crores. Now, the problem here is parties have realized that we are winning elections because of this. And they are going to increase this, but they are also going to sustain the flips that opposition parties made. I'll give you an example. In Chhattisgarh, when Rahul Gandhi in Himachal said, if you vote us to power, we will revert from the NPS to the OPS, despite everyone saying you will go bankrupt. In fact, the Revdi word is attributed to Prime Minister Modi. It was used by Monting Singh Ahluwalia, the Congress leader. He said, don't do this. This is the biggest Revdi. Switching to OPS, you'll go bankrupt. Now they've gone bankrupt. But when they switched from NPS to OPS, all then Congress-ruled states also did the same. Chhattisgarh switched to OPS. Now, Chhattisgarh has now come under BJP rule for about a year. But they haven't reverted to NPS. So this is an infection, Prime Minister, that is spreading. How to curb this?
I see where you're coming from. Partly I share the analysis. Not entirely. But the objective, I think, should be clear to all of us. I don't think we won the Haryana election entirely because of the factor you mentioned. Haryana, the dynamics of Haryana, and I was one of the few people, I'm on public record, when everybody said, Ki yaar, ye to gaya. I said, no, Haryana, we will win. Because a particular combination there was taking shape there. Tauji was, had succeeded in doing a thing. So let's put that aside. In some of the other cases, this was, yes, a contributing factor and could have been. But, look at the brighter side of it. Wherever the opposition has come to power, and the states are fortunately few and far between, if you see their management of public finances, and I draw your attention to Karnataka, no matter what you promise, people will say, go to hell, this is not going to work. When you promise things like delivery, and I'm being very frank, I mean, actually sitting here, you've been open, we've got to get our act together in Delhi as well. I mean, one year you can say that, oh, that guy did it because of freebieism. You won Delhi essentially because Kejriwal had already lost Delhi, because people saw those freebies, took the freebies, still said that this is not on. So now there is a reaction which freebiism produces. I am an eternal optimist. I think what will happen is that the overall picture of good governance is also good politics, that you see the statistics in empirical terms of the kind you were outlining in your opening question before you came to the dead economy question. By the way, I think the finance ministry should get a pracharak like you. No, seriously. No, my point is, I think when people say that, look, I'm a student of political science, and it was Machiavelli, not writing in The Prince, but in the Discourses upon Livy. He says, the mass is wiser and more constant than the prince. So the people, Kejriwal can come and give any story on, main ye mufat kar dunga. One of the interesting conversations I had with him when I was housing minister, he said, Hardeep ji, ye mantri log to, adhikari log to aate jaate rehte hain. आप ऐसे करिए ना, हर एक सरकारी घर के साथ जो सर्वेंट क्वार्टर है, वो 2-3 फ्लोर और बना दीजिए. मैंने कहा उससे क्या होगा? नहीं, उससे मैंने लोगों को रहने की जगह मिल जाएगी. मैंने कहा आप ऐसे करें, मैं तो इन सबको प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना में लाभार्थी बनाना चाहता हूं. एंड लुक, दैट इज द थिंग. आपने 4 करोड़ हमारे नागरिकों को प्रधानमंत्री आवास दिया, योजना में आवास दिया. You promised another 3 crore. That is the way to go, not to...
That's welfare. That's not free.
No, hold on. Pradhan Mantri Awas is... Exactly, it's not freebie. But what he's saying is, you round them up and just give it to them, allot them, because we are... Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is a very sensible welfare scheme. It has 4 verticals. That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to draw the distinction between freebieism. Under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, 4 verticals. 1, affordable housing in partnership. State government gives the land. State government identifies people who are eligible. They do a demand assessment. If they are below the poverty line or fill the criteria, state government gives the land, they give some money, central government gives. It's a scheme doing beautifully. Then if you have affordable housing, that's the way to do it. Now, if you're telling me some part of freebieism is coming in, look, I'll tell you, I was in a party meeting the other day and I'm known for a little rash speaking, and I said something, somebody pointed out, no, आप राज्यसभा से elected है ना, आप इसलिए बोल गए. मैंने कहा नहीं भैया, मेरा philosophical anchoring राज्यसभा लोकसभा में नहीं है, पहले से है यार. But this will happen. But it's a healthy debate. Let me assure you, as long as the country is run by the Prime Minister, and that's going to be for a while, you will not have this extra creeping in of that kind of thing, because we realize what's happening. If you give a guarantee on anything, you know what happens? Whether you need to produce or not, he will produce. I'll give you an example from trade.
Like MSP.
Huh?
Like MSP. But we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're running out of time.
No,
so
sure.
we have 3 other issues to cover. And the third, I'm sorry, I keep coming back to your very dear friend, Rahul Gandhi. But you know,
why didn't you invite him here to address you?
unki
I mean, you would get a session of insights. I mean, his knowledge ranges from caste census to vote chori to dead economy. Huh? Yeah, absolutely.
I think the moment he comes back to India, we'll invite him.
No, he's gone to...
he's come back?
He's come back, gone to Myanmar again?
No, his vacations are when he comes to...
Thailand? No. No, circuit एक ही है वो Thailand, Myanmar का पतन.
No, but you know, going forward, and we've seen this ever since, you've seen the dawn of this year, particularly, the turmoil, geopolitics, whatever, that energy security is one of the greatest issues that is facing any country, specifically India. Now, in that context, what would you say to your dear friend when he says Narendra has surrendered?
First of all, I think he was looking for some words with DER and DIR and DER, so he just got derailed. First of all, Anand, the honest God's truth is there is no shortage of energy in the world today. There is more and more energy coming on the global markets than there is consumption. Let me give you an example. Before this current phase of turmoil, and I've been minister for petroleum, I held other charges also, but for last 4 years, in my 5th year going, I think I joined Rizal 21 July, and I think Ukraine and that took place in February 22. So that's roughly the period. If you look at that as a period of reference, which you call turmoil, the group of countries which style themselves as OPEC plus, which includes all the Gulf countries and Russia, they decided, and they will not tell you, but it's an open secret. They decided to pull 5 million barrels of oil off the market. The consumption then, the production and consumption then was 102 million barrels. They took 5 million barrels off the market, which means reduced their production, came down to 97 in the hope that prices will either go up or not fall further. If somebody like me who was a newcomer and slightly innocent were to ask them, कि भाई ये why are you doing this to price? हम price के साथ तो deal ही नहीं करते. We only deal with the amount of supplies that we release. Anyway, we leave that. Even after that, except during the period of COVID, when there was an economic lockdown and the price fluctuation was during the total economic lockdown, it came down to $19.56 a barrel, and then it shot up to $138 a barrel. Today, price of oil, I think, should be around 65, 67 or something like that. By the way, if it's anything less than 65, there's one large country, largest economy in the world, their shale will have problems on being competitive. That's a different issue. There is more and more oil coming on the global market. Where is it coming from? It's coming including from the Western Hemisphere. Brazil, it produces 3 million barrels a day. They get another 140,000 barrels coming. US is the world's largest producer. I think they produce 13 million barrels a day. Russia used to produce 13 million barrels a day. They've brought it down to 9. But the issue is different.
Pakistan is also slated to produce.
No, but I saw something on that. What do they call memes? There's one president of one country shouting at somebody and said, Dave, this guy misled me. He said that one country has oil, and but it is not oil, it's oli. So anyway, I won't go into that. The point is that somebody said that they have oil and Baluchistan. Chhod do yaar usko. Main cheez ye hai ki more and more oil is coming on the global market. But that's not the real question. Which country in the world is going to be consuming more? And that's India. And you are not only consuming more, you are also producing more now. I mean, you've got a massive potential staring you in the face in the Andaman Sea for offshore. And why am I telling you this? First of all, Anand.
So here, sorry to interrupt, not only the son is anti, the mother has also written about the Andaman issue.
No, but that's a different issue. That's that you shouldn't do any exploring, etc. वो तो coastal वाले में लिखा है, but otherwise. But seriously, India is the few country. I mean, China consumes a lot, but China is saturated. I think their entire electric vehicles program now is based on the thermal thing. But in India, we were consuming 5 million barrels a day when I joined this port ministry. We are now consuming 5.6, it'll go up to 6. The International Energy Agency based in Paris says in the next 2 decades, next 20 years, 25% of the increase in demand of global energy will come from India. Now, India is therefore in the unique position of actually playing the market card. I mean, I should say this because there are negotiations going. I'll say it right. Today, there is no energy concern.
Sorry to interrupt you again. As the question was, is our energy security considered paramount? Because that is important.
And it's not only paramount, the Prime Minister is very clear in his mind that the Prime Minister owes a duty to the Indian electorate. So in the last 10 years, ko choda, main 4-5 saal ki apni baat karta hoon. If there were floods in an area, my colleagues in the oil marketing companies delivered an LPG cylinder, LPGs made from the refinery, from crude oil, on their shoulders to people. All of you live in different cities, Pondicherry, Delhi. Tell me, have you ever had an experience of any LPG shortage or pipe gas shortage? Or when you go to a petrol, there may be a local incident somewhere where a heavy flood and some water entered the tank, etc. Other than that, availability, no problem. Affordability, prices have come down over the last 4 years. The central government reduced its excise duty on petrol and diesel First time in November 21, next time in May 22, then once again, I think before some election, because there was a residual part. So you've got availability, affordability, and sustainability. That's the best part of the story. You're doing 20% biofuel blending from things like agricultural waste, from bamboo now, from maize was 0%. Earlier you were doing it only C-heavy molasses. You know, when you take the sugar cane, take the juice out, or nichod ke, the brown gooey stuff. Now C-heavy molasses, thoda broken food grain procured because of your friends, MSP or whatever. I don't know. And today, your green hydrogen is the thing we should be looking at. You know, when green hydrogen comes on the market, all you need is inexpensive clean solar energy and an electrolyzer. I used to ask people the question, what is the price most reasonable of 1 kilo of green hydrogen? I was told Australia, $5.50. Today, IOCL has issued a tender, brought it below $4. HPCL has brought it down even below to $3.28. The minute it comes below $3, then $150 billion you spend on energy import, you will be in the leading the thing prime time every day to say shift to green hydrogen, because all that produces is water vapor. So we have diversified our sources of supply from 27 to 40. We've diversified our feed for biofuels. We are going into green hydrogen a big way. And by the way, green hydrogen, a lot of people will talk, but green hydrogen will succeed where there is local demand, local production, and local consumption, because the gas does not lend itself to transportation. Green ammonia may.
And I mean, just to add to that, if I'm not mistaken, our installed solar capacity 10
that's
years
going
ago
up exactly.
was 2 gigawatts. I think now it's crossed 100, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There is one issue, however, where there is not much talk by the government. And here I would like you, Minister, to come in. Because when we talk of reforms, and this government, everyone wants reforms from this government says, yes, it is on this reform, transform, I don't know what the third part is. Perform, yes. Sorry, I don't know why I forgot the perform bit. No pun intended there. But the fact of the matter is that there are reforms that touch 3 million people, 4 million people, banking reforms, bankruptcy code, this, that, whatever. This Prime Minister took reforms that, according to me, were the greatest reforms since independent India, because they touched not 3 or 4 million people, they touched 300 million people directly. That was 44% of our workforce. I'm talking about the farm laws. And to transform this sector, that would have catapulted us within a decade and a half, perhaps, to a middle-income economy. But the fact of the matter is, within a year, and, you know, when a politician obviously looks at all the chess pieces on the board before he carries out the reforms, and Mr. Modi would have thought these are the easiest reforms to do because BJP didn't promise them. The opposition promised them. In fact, point number 11, point number 19, so many other verbatim, these 3 farm laws were there in the Congress 2019 manifesto. In their erstwhile root state of Punjab, they had implemented one reform, contract farming as an act, Contract Farming Act. So he would have thought this is the easiest thing to do. Little did he know, the moment you bring those 3 reforms, everything turned haywire and you had to repeal them, what according to me was the darkest day of independent India's history. Tell us something, when this government promises reforms, why does it take back the greatest reforms that have ever happened in India? Was it because of the opposition pressure or was it because something else?
Well, look, I can only answer a question to the extent that I have personal knowledge of it. So I'll break your question down into this thing. Was the plea for this reform there in the Congress manifesto? Yes. Who put it in there? I have a reasonably good idea. Some intelligent people, one of them you named also, because I've been having conversations a long time and everybody, all of us were agreed that you need to carry out these reforms. Did a lot of thinking go into this before the government took its views on 3 reform? I think the answer is yes. And everybody said that yes, this will, even if I totally agree with you, even if I don't share the analysis you have about middle income country, this thing which you had, but yes, it would unleash and make available a lot of positive economic potential. I happened to be present in the cabinet meeting when this decision was taken. And one of my colleagues, she shall remain nameless, she welcomed them with she welcomed them with glee, enthusiasm, and said something to the effect that this was the best reform. I mean, she was a Anand Ranganathan spirit of Anand Ranganathan was present and said very positive thing. I know 1 or 2 days later also, she
was in the cabinet while you were.
This was in the cabinet, but 1 or 2 statements after that also were welcoming from the political formation that she represented. But then a couple of days later, they flipped. Because some vested interest somewhere, when they found it difficult to go into their own family bastion, I don't know what happened, I don't know. And then an entire movement started. Now, I don't want to go into what happened. I know, I'm familiar with the difficult decision which had to be taken by the Honorable Prime Minister when he decided that even though that was the best thing, but in the larger interest in order to avoid, they were rewarded. I'll stop here because if you ask me, then I will go on and I may give this thing. But I think this is the what I know about this.
Because the fact again of the matter is that we are possibly never going to have these 3 sets of farm laws again.
No, that's not a discussion I'd like to get into because there are always things which in my world, I can't even say it. Look, there is a reality down here. There is a reality to...
But you do agree that this sector is crying out for reforms. I mean, if there is any sector...
Yeah, I agree with you. But see, I have had the privilege of watching this sector on a different way. I was a young first secretary sent on our delegation to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, with the precursor of the WTO. The year of the Lord, 1981, September. And I have seen the kind of disputes which used to go on. The Europeans had a policy called the Common Agricultural Policy, which was an entrenched system of subsidization of agriculture. You understand? And the taxpayer was coming under a lot of strain there. The taxpayer was reeling. Then in successive rounds of multilateral trade negotiation, they would try to reform that. Some reform took place. But Anand, the fundamental difference is their agriculture is in the corporate sector. You have huge farms. You've got huge amounts of this thing. In India, the holdings are small. The small farmer, their interests are getting affected. So I think you and I shall have a discussion on this in a spiritual setting in the evening one day. Yes. And to...
Spiritual. You can't beat that. But, you know, just to end on this sector, because again, one of the reforms, and you mentioned the T word, the tax, one of the reforms that many are logically crying out for is that why on earth is agricultural income not taxed? By estimates, the government would stand to gain upwards of 3.5 to 4 lakh crores every year. Now, is it again out of political expediency that you're not taxing a business that should be taxed?
I have a golden rule. I never comment on any taxation matter. It's in the sole and exclusive preserve of my senior colleague Nirmala ji. So next time you call her here, please ask her.
Right. Okay. The final point I'd like to make. In the last 11 years, we're talking about transforming India. No doubt the facts are in front of us. India has been transformed. But, you know, one of the things, Hardeep ji, that endeared me to the Prime Minister was something that he said in 2013. And I thought, here is a man who said what is crying out to be said. And he said, and I quote him verbatim, he said, a government has no business to be in business. And he said this in 2013. I said, here is a man who recognizes what the job of the government is. It is not to be running businesses. But unfortunately, in the last 11 years, I'm not saying all what your government has done is to be in the business of running businesses, but we have 1,830 public sector units. 400 of them are non-functional. Every year, 21% of our annual allocated budget goes in propping up these PSUs. We have capital infusion every year of 2 lakh, 3 lakh crores. What is the government doing by, making mixer grinders, scooters, and all those things? Do you think, at least in this department, Modi has surrendered to the opposition because the opposition doesn't want these reforms?
Not at all. This is one area where your researcher, I think, has gone wrong. I think this is one area.
I'm my own researcher.
Okay, no, but then I think between your microbiology and your other academic, let me do some perspective correcting here. The Prime Minister says that government has no business to be in business. Totally correct, and he stands by it. And that government is best which has least amount of this thing. There should be minimum government and maximum governance. I think in fact that's the correct one. But I'll give you examples of what he has succeeded in doing. It should have been faster. There could be other areas. The number of public sector units which have been wound up, etc., it's phenomenal. I'll send you the detail. What happens is that when the residual, when the tail gets affected, you still have some employees somewhere, etc. Somebody goes to a court, holds it up. But let me give you one example. I became Civil Aviation Minister with independent charge in 2019. And I think one of the most difficult situations I had to deal with was the pandemic, bringing Vande Bharat people back, and the privatization of Air India. It made an attempt to sell Air India on 2 earlier occasions, failed because they wanted to retain 24% or so. I was the one who turned around and said, why do you messed it up for, I'm sorry, I'm using a somewhat casual language. I said, we didn't make it work for 50 years. Why would anybody else come and put their money into it if you're retaining 24% and you can have a reasonably strong stay in it? And I said, I find it very difficult to go to my senior colleague every year, say, okay, I need 8,000 crores. You mentioned a figure to run Air India. And so first time I went to her, she said, look, I understand you've just come. Give me a planned phase out. And we started working out a planned phase out. One day I went to the Prime Minister during COVID, I think, and there was a long table. He was sitting on the other end. I was sitting, both of us wearing masks. It was one of those difficult days. And I told him I've succeeded in bringing down the recurring cost by 1,500 crores, okay, annually. And we've done this, we've done that, all the other good things we've done. And all I could hear him ask me a question, ke jhel loge isko? Will you be able to manage? No, but that's the reality of politics. I mean, I had Air India Pilots Association, I shouldn't talk like this, coming in, visiting me and said, no, aap isko ye kar rahe hain, you'll sell us, hamare ye perks chale. What I'd done is, meanwhile, there were peculiar things happening. Whether you flew or not, you were getting 75 hours of flying allowance. If you're during the pandemic, I mean, the people are not flying, they're getting 75. Once the owner of, then the guy used to run Qatar Airways came and told me, he said, you guys are great. You give your guys a layover in London and you give them so much of per diem, the daily allowance, and you also pay for their hotel stay. I said, what do you do? He said, we give them half. So at Air India, because it was, if you were traveling or your nephew was traveling and I could get you upgraded and you did me a favor by you were something to do with the pay and allowances. They were having a ball and the company was draining 8,000 crores down. And the government set up an ISM. Some people in the ISM thought, ke nahi, abhi pandemic acha figure milega, nahi milega. We got it through. There's normally a system of bureaucrats. They're all very cautious. They always give a reserve price very high. Kal CBI inquiry hogi, to, we will not be questioned. So I told my friend, I shouldn't name him, but I will. I told Amitabh Kant, who's more recent. I retired long back. I don't know many of these journalists. I said, Amitabh, you tell them, इस बारी अगर उन्होंने unrealistic reserve price दी, तो मैं inquiry करवाऊंगा उस पे. Because they don't, because a lot of people said, people are waiting for Air India's value to become kachra so that they can buy it at the value of scrap. I said, I won't let this happen. We got 2 bids in. Each one of them was 15% higher. And I said entirely the credit goes to the Prime Minister. He was very clear once. I also got a little shaky. Somebody said, yaar, 2 bari fail ho gayi hai ye attempt to sell. Tumhare zamane mein third hogi. Nripinder Mishra was the principal secretary to the PM. I had the privilege of knowing him. I went to him and said, look, keh rahe nahi hai. He said, dekho, galti se mat karna. That a word will get around. You are also against privatization. There are a lot of people are. Because they were enjoying Air India's position. I decided that day enough is enough. We got it sold. Rest is history. Now people say, Arey bhai, Air India, Arey, you messed it up for 50 years. Give them at least 5 years. It's not only known to be a top-class Indian line, global airline. And you see the civil aviation sector in India. I was joking with somebody from Indigo who was on the flight last night. I said, have you got 70%? Abhi nahi, itna nahi hai. But, you know, they're doing well. Akasa is coming up. Air India's merger is doing well. Indian civil aviation sector has ordered God knows how many 100 planes in the on the market.
Minister, it proves the point that a government has no business to be in business.
Absolutely
you know?
not.
So hence the
And
follow-up
I tell you what,
question-
my companies, oil companies, I have got 5 oil marketing companies.
I was coming to
Their
the oil
dividend,
companies.
dividend is, I said yesterday said that to a group of investors, 22%. They corrected me, sir, I'm to 40% dividend de rahe. Which other private sector company is giving this kind of dividend? And of course, you know, you say PSUs are bureaucratic. They have the Central Secretariat Service bureaucrats mentality. I said, you know, you're better off. You want a family-owned company where the family is interfering, or you want an OMC where you have a minister like me who couldn't be bothered about what contract you do, provided the policy direction is correct. And the fact is, they are doing exceptionally well. So whether it's IOCL, which is 7th largest company downstream in the world, ONGC, oil, they are Fortune 500, and the other ones which are coming in, that sector is booming.
So please give me a time frame when the government will not be owning any business. Would it be under your duration as Prime Ministership?
No, my point is that during the Prime Minister's, the trend is absolutely clear. I think what I will ask somebody who's dealing with disinvestment to put out all those companies, the little companies, all of them put out. It's very clear. 1 or 2 companies, I think, are being retained because they're in the strategic sphere. Because if you allow the private sector to come in, like for instance, if you were dealing with highly sensitive band, you know what I'm discussing. I'd be careful, even if it means putting in money there. But other than that, the direction is absolutely clear.
Fantastic. I think on that note, we've absolutely kept on time. We've got 2 minutes. Can I ask the youngest member of the audience to ask a question?
Youngest.
The youngest. 3 hands have gone up. Could you tell your ages, please? No, just joking.
Just joking. Yeah, please, don't.
Please ask. Just look at each other, and if you believe you are the youngest one of the lot, then please
ask. So my question is for the Honorable Minister.
Identify yourself also.
So my name is Meng Singh Chan. I'm a software engineer. I work in Bangalore. I work at a robotics company. So my question is for the Minister. After the Operation Sindoor, what we did to Pakistan, many experts are speculating another major terrorist attack from Pakistan. In such case, India may resume Operation Sindoor. If you could shed some light on the consequences of the recently inked defense pact between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan in a scenario particularly regarding the oil purchases from Saudi Arabia, oil markets, and our relationship with Saudi Arabia in general.
Now, I think there was an audio issue here. This thing about Operation Sindoor.
He's asking that we just paused Operation Sindoor. If there is an attack from Pakistan again, a Pahalgam type attack, and we restart Operation Sindoor, so we would be, as our new dictum goes, an attack of terror is an attack of war. So we would enter into a war. And in such case, what do you think of the recent Saudi-Pakistan NATO-like pact? Would they also enter? That's what the question.
Let me separate the two. What used to happen earlier is that Pakistan pursued the use of terror as an instrument of state policy. In other words, the Pakistanis almost admitted, I think quite openly admitted, And they said because of a variety of reasons, they're state sponsors of terrorism, and those terrorism attacks were coming from there. I have been a member of the Security, India was a Security Council, I was a representative. And we had many of the entities which are headquartered in Pakistan, we had them proscribed, either as part of the sanctions in one committee or the 1267 committee, which is Taliban and I don't remember the name of the number of the other one, but we had them proscribed. And the fact that they are sitting there in Pakistan, they're proscribed, which means the instrument, Pakistan using terror as an instrument of state policy, is established. What we have done, or rather, I wonder Prime Minister Modi has done, is that saying talks and terror don't go together. Talks and water also don't go there. We'll put that aside. Now, something interesting has happened. When Operation Sindoor was carried out, within 22 minutes, you were able to inflict debilitating damage on their terror infrastructure. And we were very consistent. The damage was to that terror infrastructure. And once it was over, the evidence for that was available through publicly available satellite imagery available in the public domain, etc. And the situation today, as I understand it, is Operation Sindoor has been paused. In other words, very clearly, if there is another attack on terror and the government makes a determination there, then it can resume. Insofar as your question on Saudi Arabia is concerned, I think it's a relevant question, but I'm not the person to answer it for the simple reason. I've seen statements by MEA. Please just look at those statements. And I think the bottom line is the implications of that are being studied. You understand? What it will do, whether we have received clarification, all I've seen are MEA statements in that. And I think we should not jump to conclusions. We will have to see what those are. I've seen some statements, no, India need not worry. This is not my business to interpret that. I think the implications are being studied, and I'm sure the MEA and the government will take a view on that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Satyam. I am a veterinary student here. Sir, my question is, we are opening very big colleges like IIT, IIM. We are opening a lot of IIT, IIM, AIMS. But the conditions of tier 2 and tier 3 colleges is getting worsened. What we will do for them?
No, I think what you're raising is a very absolutely valid point. But I would look at it a little more charitably. I would say, whilst all colleges, whether they're engineering or medical colleges, they need to be upgraded in terms of bringing them to the level of the IITs you mentioned, or All India Institutes of Medical Sciences, or whatever it is, and more of those are being opened. But I draw great strength from the fact that when we carried out the mission to the landing on the South Pole, and I saw the engineers there, many of them are daughters and sisters from tier 2 and tier 3 colleges were also there. So there is a process going on. But I'm worried about something totally different. One day when a few days after the Russia-Ukraine military conflict started, I got a call from my boss to say that he was sending me and a few other colleagues for the rescue operation. Anandji, 28,000 students were rescued. But I asked myself first question, why did they go there? We should have, Betiana, please, we should have established
Especially
the kind
those
of education.
medical degrees are not recognized.
And by the way, I was coming to that. I went to Hungary, and Hungary's degree is perhaps recognized, but some of the others are not. I don't want to get into that. But we should have put much more money into medical education infrastructure within the country. So I'm very reassured when I talk to my friend and colleague Mansukh-bhai Mandavia was a minister there, or Naddaji now. That's being happening. So I think your question is receiving very high attention. Can more be done? But tell me, when we talk even about figures, how much do you think money is spent by Indian students studying in American, Canadian, British universities every year? Just take a wild guess. Huh?
11 billion.
No, total billions of dollars. 40 or 80. 40 lakh, that may be the average. But I know an Ivy League education there in the US is today 80 lakhs per year. 100%. So I'm saying that if you call all that together, I know in the case of one country, the expenditure, if you're looking at trade deficits, is close to $25 billion. Just one country, one of the big one. But if you add it all together, please, we need, now one of the things I deal with very often are, we are opening new hospitals, but you need the doctors to go there. Why are we producing doctors which are then going abroad to see? All right, some will go because in a democracy you have freedom of movement and choice. But I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. But I think the rectification is on. But it's like my fascination for continuity and change. Because you're living it, you don't see the change taking place. But it's taking place on a daily basis. And I think more and more people are getting better and better education. Which is not to say that some of them are, this happens everywhere. If you were telling me about some of the degrees not being recognized, these are all, they were conveniently open shops to deal with a particular situation.
And talking of doctors, scarcity, there are more NGOs in India than there are doctors. So I don't want,
that's an area I don't want to go into because you guys, NGOs, whoever they are, they're a very vocal lot and not always vocal for local.
आ जाएंगे protest कर.
Sir, Dr. Selvanathan
Final
from Pondicherry. Yeah, last question, sir. Sir, increasing the incidence of lifestyle diseases, NCDs in India is so high. And I have been very passionately working for past 17 years on creating more healthy ambassadors, right from the school or it needs attention from the parents, teachers, and also because doctor community is very handicapped in dealing with lifestyle problems. It's the most difficult thing to do. So what steps that we take in bringing this idea on lifestyle modification rehabs are extremely difficult in terms of country's GDP, infrastructural cost.
It's a brilliant question. So I'll give you, because the time is not there. Let me give you a quick answer.
Yes, sir.
I had the privilege when I was ambassador to the UN in Geneva to have negotiated the first global treaty on tobacco. It was called the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, FCTC. And the medical doctor who was my partner was then in AIMS. What was his name? Come back to me in a minute. Srinath.
Ramadas?
No, Srinath. No, Ramadas was the minister for a while. No, the Srinath Reddy. Srinath Reddy was the
Health Foundation of
Health
India.
Foundation of India. He was there. Listen, I'll tell you something. The problem is that the global system also is not geared for that because the strength of the pharmaceutical lobby, etc., all that. Lifestyle changes have to come from within. So if you're working on those issues, I'll tell you what, I do very vigorous workouts. So one day I found I was getting pain in the knees. So my brilliant trainer said, you must be coming from the back. Got my back MRI done. It was perfectly all right. I continued the treatment. Then one day I discovered I didn't have a cartilage left in my right knee and very little in the left knee. So somebody very sensible said that every doctor will tell you that knee replacement kara lo, but I would recommend a different regime. So because you lose 1 kilo here, it's 5 kilos less on the knee. So I lost 11 kilos. I have changed my diet. I have done that. But it has to come inside. I am not in favor of people who have a weight problem going to, what are they called? Ozi, kya drugs ka jo hai?
Oh yes, Ozempic.
Ozempic. I mean, please look at the side effect.
Your very dear friend Abhijit Iyer Mitra is on Ozempic, I think.
Yeah, but he doesn't listen to me. No, I have many other friends. Some of them they don't know that I know the other one, but they tell me I'm on a group and we are discussing. But this is not done because you haven't looked at the side effects of that. Plus, we have another problem.
But
Diabetes here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't be talking about medical this thing. Our lifestyle, our food habits, our using cooking oil medium, which is this is carcinogenic, I think. So I think if we do the simple things, we've got such rich cultural and Ayurveda and all these things that we should not be in that. But I'm afraid we'll have to look at it.
But here also, I'll just end by this. I think the ministers have to set an example. I was watching recently Mr. Nitin Gadkari's podcast. And, he was saying he went for a bariatric surgery.
Bariatric, yeah.
Yes. And he had 3 plates of chola bhaturas before he went for the surgery.
No, but listen, listen. I'll tell you something.
pehle
That
khalu, phir
there was
jao.
a time when I was a senior civil servant, and a lot of my friends in politics, Meenakshi ji will know whom I'm referring to. Bariatric करवाने जा रहे हैं. यार कर क्या रहे हो तुम? But what is bariatric? You're going to tie the stomach there, you can't eat less. Then when you go to their house, ए जी ये sugar free है. ये इसमें मैंने क्या syringe डाल के sugar निकाला इसमें से. I mean, I had a friend who's regrettably no more. I have a lawyer friend, used to call him, oh Sardarji, when I was posting out there. Oh Sardarji, aa rahe hain. कहना हाँ I'm going to Old Delhi to bring the chole pature, etc. I didn't want to eat them. He wanted to eat them. But the point is, these things you can check. These things you can check. It's an urge inside. You can have the, I'm told, I don't eat sweets anymore, but I was told, एक हफ्ता अगर sweet नहीं खाओगे, your tongue will no longer be yearning for sugar. Anyway, I'm sorry I digressed.
On that sweet note, it's an absolute pleasure and has been an honor to share the dais with you, Minister. Thank you so much. Tom.